welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be taking you behind the scenes on how I edit photos on the iPad. You're going to be learning today how I incorporate the iPad Pro into my workflow, and then you're also going to be learning how you can just use the iPad only as your only workflow if this is the only tool that you currently have. First up, we're going to be talking about how we organize ourselves between the two programs. Now, Lightroom Classic, this automatically does everything for you by having folders. I like to go and have my folders by the dates, and you can easily go and hover over the thumbnails of each folder so that you can see a little preview of the shoot. That way you don't have to have every date memorized. And on Lightroom CC, if I do ever import the photos straight into my iPad, I always make a collection on the iPad first. Otherwise, it gets lost into space, literally, the cloud. Okay, but what I mean is your photos are going to just be on Photo tab. There's going to be no separation automatically of what the dates are. So that part is a little bit tricky and something that I don't quite like. Next up, the importing differences. How I import on Lightroom Classic, very different. On Lightroom Classic, I like to pre-cull my photos. So I like to go and bring in the photos, bring up the preview, and basically uncheck all the photos, the hundreds of photos that I've taken. And I like to go by photo, and I pick the ones that are decent enough for me to bring into my catalog. Now, it's a little bit different on Lightroom CC. What you have to do is bring in all the pictures, so all 300 or however many photos it is that you took, unless you're okay with just kind of looking at the little thumbnail, but you know, you can't really see what a photo looks like by such a tiny little thumbnail. I like to kind of have that a little bit bigger so I can make sure that, you know, nobody has blinked and that things are in focus and there aren't a bunch of flyaway hairs and places where I don't want to spend hours on Photoshop fixing. Anyhow, from there, Lightroom CC, you have to manually go and cull through the photo. A lot of people say how easy it is and how they just love that they can sit on a couch and they can just swipe up or swipe down. So you have to do that for all the photos. And then from there, there's a section where you can see all of the flagged photos, and then you can see all of the unflagged photos. So if you were to only use Lightroom CC, you would basically just click the unflagged folder, delete them all, and start working on your flagged photos. For me in my iPad workflow, I like to always go and import right into Lightroom Classic. And from Lightroom Classic, I will make a collection. And to quickly go and make a collection, you basically just select all of the photos, hit the collection button there, and you name it. So I'm going to put the client's name. On the left-hand side, you will see that the little lightning bolt is clicked, which means that it is syncing to the cloud. So now that we've gone ahead and made a collection, and we know that this gallery is synced to Lightroom CC, we'll now be able to go and edit these photos on the go from my cell phone, from my iPad, from the comfort of my home, which is absolutely great. Okay, so how do I go and edit this photo to look just like the one on the iPad? We're gonna get into it. So the first thing that I always go and do is I play with the tone curve. You'll be able to find that on the Lightroom CC version under the Light tab on the top right-hand corner. I personally like a S-curve because it adds some beautiful and natural contrast to the photo. And so super easy on the iPad. It's nice that you can just use your fingers or your Apple Pencil. Bring down the shadows a little bit, and then you bring up the highlights just a little bit, and there's your S-curve. And then to go and perfect it just a little bit further, it's this little button here on the top right corner. You are missing the ability to go and see that highlight slider, the shadows and all of that. Instead, it looks like this, and once you go and click it, it looks just like the tone curve, but you'll see that there are a couple of sliders on the bottom. Basically what I do is I bring down the highlights. It's kind of the opposite of what I do with the tone curve, and then I bring out the shadows. And then that naturally goes and gets rid of a lot of the pigmentation on her skin from being that very bright orange Cheeto Dorito yellow that we don't want, we don't want it. And then to further go and play with the skin tones, if they're looking a little bit off, or if I want to perfect it a little bit, we're gonna go and play with the HSL sliders, which are found on the CC version under the color tab. So once you go ahead and hit color, you're going to go and get a color wheel. You'll see it under there as color mix. And once you click that, you'll see the different colors that you can select, and you can go and either bring up the saturation, bring it down, you can change the hue of it. So usually with skin tones, I play with yellows and oranges, and then depending if you shoot in a very cold temperature or a very hot temperature, I guess. The reds. Reds are great if it's really cold outside and the skin starts to turn really red, or if it's really hot outside and people get sunburns, you can kind of bring down the redness just a little bit to look a little bit more like skin. And then from there, let's not forget to go and select her hair and her eyes. This part we have to go and do manually by hand, which is a little bit more tedious, but we are hoping that Lightroom will bring the smart filter features fully to Lightroom CC so that we can enjoy that. Okay, so now that we've finished selecting our hair, we bring up the exposure and the contrast, and then in the details, we go and play with the texture and the clarity. We bring that up just so that it has a nice little pop, and then you'll be able to see a nice before and an after. There we go. Everything is looking super great, and I'm pretty happy with that. We're gonna go ahead and do the same thing with the pupil of her eyes by selecting her eyes, and then from there, bringing up the exposure just a little bit, the contrast, and then we are actually going to go and add a little bit of saturation, which is found under the color tab. And so we're just gonna move that up a pinch. And then of course, we're gonna go under effects and play with the texture and the clarity, and that's looking pretty good. Lastly, the mask that we're gonna do is her blazer, giving it some exposure, texture, and clarity just to make sure that it pops. So after I'm happy with how the masks are looking, this is where I finish up in the light tab, bringing down the exposure, the contrast, the highlights, whatever is needed. And I usually always bring down the vibrance just a pinch, and then it's ready to go into Photoshop now. First thing that we're going to go ahead and do is make a duplicate layer, and we're going to rename this to removing highlights. And we're going to be using the lasso tool, and we're going to be sure to only select small portions of her head so that we don't get, you know, an extra eyebrow or something that we don't want. And we're just going to be clicking the content aware fill button on here, and we're going to do this anywhere where there is a hot spot. So the top of her head, her cheek, tip of her nose, chin, and her lip area. Now, we do want to keep some of the highlights, so we're going to bring the opacity down to 60, but we just didn't want it as prominent. From there, we're going to make another duplicate layer and rename that as the skin layer. So here we're just going to be going under her eyes, and we're just going to be using the clone stamp tool just to even out the lighting over there. And we don't want her to look too fake, so obviously we're going to be bringing that opacity layer down so that we can keep some of the natural texture of her eyes. The final layer that I'm going to be doing is the flyaway hairs, and we're going to just be using the healing stamp tool, and we're going to be zooming in on all the places that we find little flyaway hairs. Now on her head, we're going to be careful to not basically try to get rid of every flyaway hair, otherwise it'll look a little fake. I mean, hair naturally kind of does have some flyaways, but we're just going to kind of trim up some at the top there and some of the other areas. Very last layer was just a simple airbrushing layer with the brush tool, and I had gone ahead and just brought the opacity all the way down to 30% so that things looked a little bit more natural, and it's ready to get put back into Lightroom. So there you have it. That's the before, and this is the after, and that's how I would edit photos on the iPad to look just as great as the desktop version. So that was it, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope that you learned something new today, and leave a comment below if there's something that you would like me to touch on next time that I make a video. That's it. Bye.